They stuck her on ammunition depot guard duty because she looked like someone who'd never held anything more dangerous than a clipboard. No insignia, no name tape, just a quiet woman in standard BDUs carrying a notepad. But when that Navy SEAL team rolled up in their black SUVs and their commander stepped out, took one look at her, and said, "Thank God you're the one protecting this place," the base commander who'd assigned her there nearly choked on his coffee. Staff Sergeant Jessica Martinez didn't look like much that Tuesday morning at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Standard issue ACUs that had seen better days, her brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, no fancy equipment hanging from her belt. Just another face in the crowd, moving through the morning shift change on the sprawling military installation. She carried herself with that unremarkable stride of someone who knew how to blend in, how to be useful without drawing attention, the kind of soldier who gets things done while everyone else is busy looking important. She was checking inventory sheets outside the supply depot when Major Stephen Carter came strutting across the compound. You could spot him from 100 yards away, chest puffed out, boots polished to mirror shine, walking like he owned every square inch of North Carolina soil around them. The kind of officer who'd never seen real combat, but made sure everyone knew he was in charge. "Martinez," he barked, not even breaking stride. "Drop what you're doing. I need you on depot security detail." Jessica looked up from her clipboard, expression neutral. "Copy that, sir." "Which depot?" "Ammunition storage perimeter guard." He gestured toward the heavily fenced compound at the far end of base. "We've got some VIP inspection coming through later. Command wants extra eyes on our explosives." She nodded once. "Duration of assignment, sir." Carter barely looked at her, already scanning the compound for his next target. "Indefinite. Grab your gear and post up." And Martinez, he finally made eye contact, that condescending smile creeping across his face. "Try to stay awake out there. I know guard duty isn't exactly stimulating work." Jessica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "Understood, sir." Carter was already walking away, probably mentally patting himself on the back for solving his security problem with minimal effort. Just stick the quiet woman with no flashy credentials on fence duty. Let her stare at concrete bunkers while the real soldiers handled important business. If he'd bothered to ask Jessica about her background, he might have made different choices. But Major Carter wasn't the asking type. The ammunition depot sat behind 3 layers of chain link topped with razor wire, concrete barriers, and more warning signs than a nuclear facility. Jessica took her position at the main checkpoint, settling into the guard shack with a rifle, radio, and a thermos of coffee that would probably taste like motor oil by noon. Most soldiers hated this detail. Hours of staring at empty North Carolina landscape, checking the same perimeter, logging the same all-clear reports every 15 minutes. Jessica found it peaceful. No politics, no posturing, just professional vigilance. The kind of work that kept people alive even when they never knew it. She had been on post for about 2 hours when the radio crackled. "All stations, be advised, VIP convoy approaching main gate. Maintain heightened security posture." Through the morning mist rising off the compound, Jessica spotted 3 black SUVs rolling toward the base entrance. Not the usual olive drab vehicles they use for routine operations. These were serious machines with tinted windows and antennas sprouting from their roofs like electronic porcupines. The convoy cleared the main gate and headed directly toward her position. Jessica stepped out of the guard shack, rifle held in the ready position, watching as the lead vehicle approached the ammunition depot checkpoint. The SUV stopped 20 feet from the gate. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man who moved like controlled lightning. Medium height, weathered face, eyes that took in everything without seeming to look at anything specific. No name tape on his uniform. Jessica recognized the bearing immediately. Special Operations, the real deal. Behind him, 5 more operators emerged from the vehicles, each one carrying themselves with that same lethal confidence. They weren't here for a routine inspection. The team leader approached the checkpoint, and Jessica stepped forward to verify credentials, standard protocol, regardless of who they were. "Ma'am," the operator said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd earned every word he spoke. Commander Marcus Stone, Team 5. We're here for ordnance retrieval. Jessica checked his authorization papers with the same thoroughness she'd shown her morning inventory. Everything checked out, but something in his demeanor suggested this wasn't routine business. All clear, Commander, she said, stepping aside to open the gate. Anything specific you need from depot security during your operation? Commander Stone paused, studying her face for a moment. There was something in his expression. Recognition maybe, or respect. Just keep doing exactly what you're doing. Thank God you're the one protecting this place. The words hit Jessica like a puzzle piece clicking into place, but she kept her expression neutral. Commander Stone's team moved through the gate with military precision, each operator scanning different sectors as they approached the reinforced bunkers. She watched them work, noting the way they communicated with hand signals, the spacing they maintained, the professional respect they showed for the ordnance they were handling. These weren't regular Navy SEALs on a training exercise. This was something else entirely. The sharp voice cut through the morning air like a buzzsaw. Major Stephen Carter was marching toward the checkpoint, his face already red with the kind of indignation that came from not being immediately informed about everything happening on his base. Jessica stepped out of the guard shack, clipboard in hand. Martinez, what the hell is going on here? I just got word that some special operations team is ransacking my ammunition depot without proper notification through command channels, and you just let them in. Authorization checked out, sir. Commander Stone presented valid retrieval orders signed by Central Command. I followed standard protocol for classified ordnance operations. I don't care what papers they showed you. Carter snapped, stepping closer. You're a guard, not a decision-maker. You should have called me the second they showed up. Through the fence, Jessica could see Commander Stone's team methodically searching through specific ordnance containers. They weren't taking anything yet, just cataloging, photographing, treating everything with the careful attention of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Sir, protocol states that valid authorization doesn't require additional command approval for classified retrieval operations. Don't quote protocol to me, Martinez. Carter's voice was getting louder, the kind of public dressing down designed to reassert authority. You're on this detail because it's simple. Check IDs, open gates, call superiors when anything unusual happens. Somehow, you've managed to screw up the easiest job on base. A few other soldiers had started drifting over, drawn by the commotion. Carter seemed to feed off the audience, his chest puffing out even more. Maybe next time I'll put someone with actual military judgment on sensitive assignments instead of someone who can't even handle basic security protocols properly. Is there a problem here? Commander Stone's voice was quiet, but it cut through Carter's tirade like a blade. The SEAL commander had approached without anyone noticing, moving with that supernatural stealth that separated special operations from regular military. Carter spun around immediately, switching to his command voice. Commander, I'm Major Carter, Base Operations. I need to understand why my security personnel weren't properly briefed about your mission parameters. Your security personnel performed flawlessly, Stone replied, his tone carrying quiet authority. Professional, thorough by the book. Exactly what you'd want protecting sensitive ordnance. Well, yes, of course, but proper notification channels should have been followed completely, Carter said, his bluster deflating slightly. Stone held up a tablet showing digital authorization forms. Your staff sergeant here verified everything according to current standard operating procedures. If there's a communication breakdown in your command structure, that's not a security issue. Carter's face cycled through several shades of red. I just think that someone with more experience should have handled this situation. Staff Sergeant Martinez is perfectly adequate for basic guard duty, but operational decisions require seasoned judgment. Stone's expression didn't change, but Jessica caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe a recognition of a familiar type of officer. We'll be finished here within an hour, Stone said. Your staff sergeant has our complete confidence. As he turned to walk back toward his team, Carter scrambled to maintain some authority. Martinez, I want a complete incident report on my desk by 1400 hours. Full timeline, every detail, every procedure you followed. Carter stalked off, muttering about proper procedures and chain of command. Jessica watched him go, then noticed Commander Stone had paused by the gate. He walked back over, his team continuing their work without him. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly. "How long have you been at Bragg?" "6 months, sir." "And before that?" Jessica hesitated for just a moment. "Various assignments, sir." Stone nodded slowly. "I'll bet." He glanced toward where Carter had disappeared, then back to her. "Your major doesn't know, does he?" "Know what, sir?" A slight smile crossed Stone's weathered features. "Nothing, Staff Sergeant. Nothing at all." As he walked away, Jessica felt that familiar weight of a secret shared without words. Whatever Commander Stone knew about her background, whatever he'd recognized in those few minutes of interaction, it was more than Major Carter would ever bother to learn. And maybe that was exactly how she preferred it. The SEAL team finished their work an hour later, loading several unmarked containers into their vehicles with the kind of careful handling reserved for items that could level city blocks if mishandled. Jessica watched from her post, noting how they double-checked every securing strap, how they communicated in the shorthand of people who'd worked together through situations where mistakes meant body bags. Commander Stone approached her checkpoint one final time, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression she couldn't quite read. "Staff Sergeant, we're departing. Everything's been logged and accounted for." She stepped forward to verify the inventory sheets, standard protocol for any ordnance removal. Stone handed her the tablet, but as she scrolled through the digital forms, something caught her eye. The authorization codes weren't routine. These were Black Project designators, the kind that didn't exist in normal military databases. Stone was watching her face as she processed the information. "Questions, Staff Sergeant?" Jessica looked up from the tablet, meeting his steady gaze. "No questions, sir. Just wondering why ordnance this sensitive was stored at a regular Army installation." "Sometimes the safest place to hide something is in plain sight," Stone replied quietly. "And sometimes you need the right person watching over it." Before she could respond, the radio on her belt crackled to life. "All stations, this is command. Be advised, Major Carter is conducting unscheduled security inspections. All personnel, maintain ready posture." Stone raised an eyebrow. "Your major seems thorough." "He's covering his bases, sir. Probably wants to make sure everything looks regulation after your visit." "Probably." Stone paused, then seemed to make a decision. "Staff Sergeant, can I ask you something off the record?" Jessica glanced around. Stone's team was securing their vehicles, but they were still within earshot. Whatever he wanted to discuss, he wasn't worried about his people hearing it. "Of course, sir. How long were you planning to stay invisible?" The question hit like a physical blow. Jessica's training took over, keeping her expression neutral, but inside alarms were going off. Stone knew. Somehow, this SEAL commander she'd never met before today knew exactly who she was. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Stone smiled, but it wasn't condescending. It was the kind of smile you gave someone you respected for their operational security, but needed them to know the game was up. Jessica Martinez, formerly Captain Jessica Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment, Stone said quietly. Decorated for actions in Syria, classified operations in 3 other theaters, expert in demolitions, close-quarters combat, and somehow managing to disappear from official records when things got too complicated. Jessica's blood went cold. "Sir, I think you have me confused with someone else." "The woman who single-handedly held off a Taliban assault team for 6 hours while protecting a downed Blackhawk crew," Stone continued. "The same woman who disappeared from the Army rolls after testifying in a classified hearing about rules of engagement violations by her commanding officer." The world seemed to narrow down to just the 2 of them standing by that chain-link fence. Jessica's mind was racing through possibilities, calculating threats, trying to figure out how much Stone actually knew and what he intended to do with the information. "Commander, if you're suggesting I'm not who my personnel file indicates," she began carefully. "I'm not suggesting anything," Stone interrupted. "I'm stating facts. Facts that explain why a decorated Ranger captain is pulling guard duty as a staff sergeant at Fort Bragg under what I'm guessing is a carefully constructed new identity." He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. Facts that also explain why I requested you specifically for this assignment. That stopped Jessica cold. You requested me. The ordnance we just retrieved, it's going to need someone watching over it at its next location. Someone with impeccable credentials and a talent for staying off official radars. Stone pulled out a business card, plain white, with just a phone number. Someone exactly like you. Jessica stared at the card. What kind of assignment? The kind that doesn't exist on paper. The kind that requires someone who's already proven they'll do the right thing, even when the chain of command gets complicated. Before she could respond, they heard boots on gravel. Major Carter was approaching with 2 MPs in tow, his face set in that determined expression of someone about to make a point. Stone pocketed the card smoothly. Think about it, Captain. The offer stands. It's Staff Sergeant, Jessica said automatically. Not where I'm going, it isn't. Stone nodded toward Carter's approaching group. Your major's about to have some questions. I suggest you answer them the same way you've been answering everyone else's for the past 6 months. Major Carter's interrogation started before Commander Stone's convoy had even cleared the main gate. The 2 MPs flanked Jessica like she was a security threat, while Carter paced in front of the guard shack with all the subtlety of a prosecutor building a case. Let's start from the beginning, Martinez. What time did the SEAL team arrive? 0847 hours, sir. Jessica's voice remained steady, professional. She'd been through interrogations before, though never by someone with Carter's limited imagination. And they just showed up. No advance notice, no coordination through proper channels. They followed standard protocol for classified ordnance retrieval, sir. Authorization was verified and logged. Carter stopped pacing. See, that's what bothers me. Standard protocol would have included notification to base command. I should have been briefed. One of the MPs, a young specialist named Davis, shifted uncomfortably. Even he seemed to understand that Carter was fishing in empty water, looking for violations that didn't exist. Sir, Jessica said carefully, the authorization codes they presented were above base command level. The system showed valid approval from Central Command for immediate retrieval operations. I don't care what the system showed, Carter snapped. I care about a staff sergeant making operational decisions without consulting superiors. What were they taking from the depot? Classified ordnance, sir. Inventory numbers are in the system. What kind of classified ordnance? Jessica met his eyes. Above my clearance level, sir. That was technically true. The Ordnance Stone's team had retrieved was so far above standard classification levels that it existed in a different universe than Carter's security clearance. But it was also the kind of half-truth that would drive him crazy. Above your clearance level, Carter's voice pitched higher. Then how did you verify they were authorized to take it? Digital authorization system, sir. The same way any classified material gets verified. And you didn't think to call me when special operations showed up to collect explosives you can't even identify. Before Jessica could answer, her radio crackled. Base command to Major Carter. Please report to the colonel's office immediately. Carter's face went through several interesting color changes. Being summoned to explain yourself to a full colonel was never a good sign, especially when you'd just spent an hour trying to find fault with procedures that had apparently been approved at levels you didn't even know existed. This isn't over, Martinez, Carter muttered, gesturing for the MPs to follow him. I want a complete written report, and I mean complete. Every detail, every conversation, every procedure you followed. As they walked away, Specialist Davis glanced back over his shoulder with something that looked almost like respect. Word was already spreading through the enlisted ranks that quiet Staff Sergeant Martinez had somehow handled a situation that had left their major scrambling to cover his own rear end. Jessica waited until they were out of sight, then pulled out the card Commander Stone had given her. Just a phone number, but she could feel the weight of the decision it represented. A chance to step back into a world she'd walked away from, to use skills she'd been forced to bury under layers of bureaucratic paperwork and security clearances. Her radio crackled again. Staff Sergeant Martinez, report to the colonel's office. The walk across base gave her time to think, to prepare for questions she'd probably been expecting since the day she'd arrived at Fort Bragg. Colonel Patricia Wade was old-school Army, the kind of officer who'd earned her rank through competence rather than politics. If anyone was going to see through the carefully constructed story of Staff Sergeant Jessica Martinez, it would be her. Colonel Wade looked up from her computer as Jessica knocked. Enter and close the door behind you. Jessica took a position at attention in front of the desk, but Wade gestured for her to sit. That was either a very good sign or a very bad one. Relax, Staff Sergeant. This isn't a formal inquiry. Wade leaned back in her chair. I just had an interesting conversation with Major Carter. He seems to think you overstepped your authority during today's ordnance retrieval operation. I followed standard procedures, ma'am. I know you did. Wade pulled up something on her computer screen. I also just got off the phone with some people in Washington who wanted to make sure our cooperation with today's operation was appreciated. She turned the monitor so Jessica could see it. A commendation letter already drafted, praising the professionalism and competence of Fort Bragg security personnel during a sensitive classified operation. Seems Commander Stone was impressed with our security protocols, Wade continued. Specifically mentioned the thoroughness and military bearing of our ammunition depot security personnel. Jessica remained silent, sensing there was more coming. Wade studied her for a long moment. Staff Sergeant, in my experience, SEAL commanders don't usually take time to write glowing reviews of base security guards, unless there's something about that security guard that makes her worth noticing. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unasked questions and carefully maintained cover stories. Finally, Wade leaned forward. I don't know who you really are, Staff Sergeant Martinez. And frankly, I don't need to know. What I need to know is that you're the kind of soldier who can handle sensitive assignments without creating problems for my command. Yes, ma'am. Good, because I have a feeling this won't be the last time interesting people show up requesting our cooperation. 2 days later, Jessica was back at the ammunition depot, but the routine had changed. Word of her interaction with the SEAL team had spread through the base like wildfire, carried by the kind of whispered conversations that happened in chow lines and motor pools. Not the full story, nobody knew that, but enough pieces to make people look at her differently. The young specialist who delivered supply requisitions now knocked on the guard shack door instead of just dropping papers through the slot. The motor pool sergeant who used to barely acknowledge her existence had started tipping his cap when their paths crossed. Even the civilian contractors working maintenance on the fence line had begun asking if she needed anything during their shifts. It wasn't hero worship. Military personnel were too practical for that. But it was respect, the kind that came from recognizing that quiet Staff Sergeant Martinez had handled a situation that left their major looking like an amateur. Major Carter, meanwhile, had gone conspicuously silent on the subject of security protocols and proper procedures. Jessica had submitted her incident report, a masterpiece of technical accuracy that revealed absolutely nothing interesting, and heard nothing back. Carter still strutted around the base with the same self-important bearing, but she'd noticed he'd found new targets for his attention to detail. The card from Commander Stone remained in her pocket, a constant reminder of choices she hadn't made yet. 3 times she'd started to dial the number, and 3 times she'd stopped. The life she'd built at Fort Bragg was peaceful, anonymous, exactly what she'd thought she wanted after everything that had happened with the Rangers. But peaceful wasn't the same as fulfilling. On Thursday afternoon, her quiet contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Colonel Wade's aide, a sharp young lieutenant named Jennifer Brooks, appeared at the checkpoint with the kind of urgent energy that usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Staff Sergeant, the colonel needs to see you immediately. Problem with my security report. Not exactly. Brooks glanced around, then lowered her voice. We've got visitors, the kind that don't appear on official schedules. The walk to the administration building felt longer than usual. Brooks wasn't volunteering any additional information, which meant whatever was waiting for her was either too classified to discuss in the open or too politically sensitive to risk speculation. Colonel Wade's outer office was occupied by 2 men in expensive suits who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from alphabet agencies most people pretended didn't exist. They looked up as Jessica entered, and she caught the subtle evaluation in their eyes, the way they cataloged potential threats and assets in the same glance. Staff Sergeant Martinez, the older one, stood, extending his hand. Agent Harrison, Department of Defense. This is Agent Williams. Jessica shook hands with both men, noting the firm grips and steady eye contact of people who were very good at their jobs. Gentlemen, we'd like to ask you a few questions about your interaction with Commander Stone's team earlier this week. Before Jessica could respond, Colonel Wade's office door opened. "Bring her in," came the colonel's voice. The inner office felt crowded with 5 people, but Wade had arranged chairs in a way that made it feel more like a briefing than an interrogation. Still, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to learn something that would change everything. "Staff Sergeant, these gentlemen are here about the ordnance that was retrieved from our depot. It seems there's been a development." Agent Harrison opened a tablet and turned it toward her. "Are you familiar with this location?" The satellite image showed a compound in what looked like desert terrain. Concrete buildings, defensive positions, the kind of hardened facility that suggested either very valuable assets or very dangerous enemies. "No, sir. It's in Somalia," Williams added. 3 days ago, it was attacked by a coordinated force of approximately 40 combatants. The attack was repelled, but barely. Agent Harrison swiped to the next image, showing blast damage and scorched earth around the compound's perimeter. The ordnance that Commander Stone retrieved from your depot was used to reinforce the defensive positions at this facility. Without it, the attack would have succeeded. Jessica studied the images, her tactical mind automatically assessing the defensive layout, the attack patterns, the resources that would have been required to hold off a force that size. What was being defended? A joint intelligence gathering facility, Wade answered. The kind that doesn't exist on any official maps. Williams leaned forward. "Staff Sergeant, the reason we're here is that intelligence gathered from the captured attackers suggests they had detailed knowledge of our security procedures. Someone told them exactly when that ordnance would be vulnerable during transport." The implications hit Jessica like cold water. "You think there was a leak?" "We know there was a leak," Harrison said flatly. "What we don't know is where it came from." The ordnance retrieval operation involved exactly 7 people. Commander Stone's 5-man team, you, and Major Carter. Stone's team is above suspicion, Wade added. They've been vetted at levels that don't have names. That leaves base personnel. Jessica felt the walls closing in. "You think it was me?" "We think," Harrison said carefully, "that someone with detailed knowledge of the retrieval operation provided information to hostile forces. Someone who knew timing, routes, and defensive capabilities. And since you were the only base personnel with direct access to operational details, Williams spread his hands in a gesture that managed to seem both apologetic and accusatory. Jessica looked around the room, seeing the careful neutrality on Colonel Wade's face, the professional assessment in the agent's eyes. After 6 months of careful anonymity, her past had finally caught up with her, but not in the way she'd expected. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "I think you better sit down because there are some things about Staff Sergeant Martinez that you need to understand." The silence in Colonel Wade's office stretched like a taut wire. Agent Harrison and Williams exchanged glances, their professional composure showing the first cracks of uncertainty. They'd come here expecting to investigate a security breach by an enlisted soldier. What they were about to hear would change everything. Jessica took a deep breath. "My name isn't really Jessica Martinez." Harrison's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, where Jessica assumed he kept either a weapon or recording device. Wade held up a warning finger. 6 months ago, I was Captain Jessica Barrett, 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion, decorated for actions in Syria, Afghanistan, and 2 other theaters that don't appear in public records. Williams pulled out a tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "There's no record of a Captain Barrett in recent military databases." Because those records were sealed, Wade interrupted quietly. "Weren't they, Captain?" The title hung in the air like an accusation. Jessica nodded slowly. "I testified before a closed congressional hearing about rules of engagement violations by my commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Webb. He'd been ordering strikes on civilian targets, covering it up in after-action reports. When I refused to falsify intelligence assessments, He had me transferred to punishment details. Harrison leaned forward. What kind of punishment details? The kind where talented officers get sent to places where they die accidentally. Jessica's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. Webb had connections, political protection. When my testimony threatened to expose his operations, certain people decided the problem wasn't his war crimes. The problem was me. Williams was still scrolling through his tablet, his frown deepening. I'm showing classified flags all over your service record, sections that require clearances we don't have. That's because after I testified, someone very high up the chain realized I was right about Webb. But they also realized that prosecuting a decorated colonel would raise uncomfortable questions about who else knew what he was doing. Wade crossed her arms. So they offered you a deal. Disappear voluntarily, accept a reduction in rank and a new identity, and Webb would be quietly retired instead of court-martialed. Refuse, and my accident-prone reassignments would continue until the problem solved itself permanently. The two agents sat back in their chairs, absorbing implications that reached far beyond their original investigation. Harrison was the first to recover. So you became Staff Sergeant Jessica Martinez. New Social Security number, new service records, assignment to Fort Bragg where nobody asks uncomfortable questions about quiet soldiers who do their jobs. Except Commander Stone recognized you, Wade said. Stone was part of a joint operation I supported in Afghanistan. I provided intelligence assessments that saved his team from walking into an ambush. He knew my real name, my real record. Wade pulled out a manila folder from her desk drawer, which explains why when I requested your full service record after Stone's visit, I got a phone call from the Pentagon telling me to stop asking questions. She opened the folder, revealing heavily redacted documents with more black ink than text. Captain Barrett's commendations include a silver star, 2 bronze stars, and a Purple Heart. Her tactical assessments were used to plan 14 successful special operations missions. Her testimony before Congress led to the investigation of procurement fraud worth approximately $200 million. Harrison and Williams exchanged looks that suggested their investigation had just become significantly more complicated. Agent Harrison, Jessica said quietly, "You're looking for someone who leaked operational details about the retrieval operation. Someone with access to timing, routes, and defensive capabilities." That's correct. Then you're looking for Major Carter. 6 months after that morning in Conference Room 7A, Jessica Anderson found herself in another briefing room. But this time, the circumstances were completely different. She was sitting at the head of the table in a classified facility outside Washington, D.C., leading a joint task force meeting with representatives from multiple military branches and intelligence agencies. The woman who'd once hidden her capabilities was now openly sharing everything she'd learned about survival, leadership, and the responsibility that came with exceptional skill.